Well, thank you for having us tonight. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Laura Shira. I'm staff with Yakama Nation Fisheries Program, and this is Sherry Duncan, also staff with Yakama Nation Fisheries Program. We also have online Teresa Michelson, who's our consultant with Avocet Consulting. Um, we have her online as a presenter, and she may speak up at times to add to anything we've forgotten or to help answer questions. We are housed within the habitat section of the Yakama Nation Fisheries Program, and our group, our little 5-member group, focuses on contaminated sites, on toxicity in the Columbia River, but with the habitat focus. And that's what we've been trying to do at Portland Harbor, is make sure that protective decisions are made with respect to toxicity reduction, but also with respect to habitat needs. And we're so lucky to have hired on Sherry recently. She comes with a fishery biologist background and a lot of expertise and experience in habitat restoration. So I'm going to open it up, and then I'm going to turn it over to the expert. Let's see. So tonight I'm going to talk about habitat goals, our outreach goals, some visioning that we've started and still have a lot of work to do on. And then I'll turn it over to Sherry to talk about habitat restoration projects and successes in urban settings. And then we want to talk about how you can help, and then turn it over to the question and answer section. So Yakama Nation habitat goals for us, it's about the fish. It's about all the aquatic resources and riparian critters on the river, but it's for Yakama Nation, it's especially about the fish. And one of our taglines that we use a lot is clean, healthy fish that are safe to eat. That's our ultimate goal here in Portland Harbor. If we can get the sediments and the water quality clean enough for clean, healthy fish, then it'll be clean enough for all the resources, ecological and human. The reason for focusing on cleanup, for focusing on habitat, and for the really relatively low cleanup levels at Portland Harbor is because it's in a very unique ESA setting, endangered. Oh my gosh, the Chinook salmon. It's in a very unique ESA and tribal resources setting. There's a lot of tribes that are very active members and populations, users of the system of the Willamette River, of the Columbia River Basin. There's a significant urgency to doing this work, not just the cleanup work, but also the habitat work. What we've learned in the Monsanto case, but biologists have been talking about this for a long time, is that without cleanup, without habitat improvements, the Columbia River and the Willamette River are on a trajectory for Chinook salmon extinction within the lifetime of the Portland Harbor cleanup. And so that's why it's so critically important to use this Portland Harbor cleanup as an opportunity not only to reduce toxicity, but to implement cleanup projects that can change that trajectory to something more positive. Other goals that we have are a functioning ecosystem, connectivity. I know in the trustee council early documents, it talks about goals of a string of pearls, establishing a series of stepping stones, a series of these pockets of connected habitat or closely spaced habitat up and down both the east side and the west side of the river corridor, so that migrating fish can stop and rest, they can stop and feed, they can make the journey in a safe way that ensures a better chance of survival and growth and coming back to spawn again. In fact, we've also heard some biologists talk about, the maximum distance you should ever have between these stepping stones would be a 1/4 mile, but ideally you need them closer spaced than that. That would be a maximum distance. And so we're going to show you some visualization that we've been working on towards achieving that goal. We're also, one of our goals for habitat is also climate resiliency, and a habitat timeline continuum. Right now, there's a lot of planning for cleanup, but in addition, there's all kinds of permits out there for dredging, for the regular port operations, for improvements to facilities, the docks and structures. And those are opportunities of themselves for habitat improvements, whether it's just structural improvements to help with lighting for better salmon survivability. Um, Within cleanup, there's mitigation and toxicity reduction chances, opportunities. There's also NRD, but it's important to note that none of these are enough in of themselves. It has to be a continuum. It has to be a focus during all those things and beyond. Cleanup needs to set a slate for more habitat improvements to come in, because right now we don't have the connectivity that we need throughout the river corridor with just those things alone. I'm sorry, natural resource damages. It's what the trustee council has been working on, and Yakama Nation is also a trustee, but we are not part of the trustee council. But I think they have a consent decree that recently went out for public comment for habitat restoration projects within natural resource damages. Yeah. I don't, did my explanation help you understand? Yeah, okay. Our outreach goals are to seek input and collaboration from all parties, tribes, agencies, community members, businesses, the industry on the river. It's to brainstorm so that we have a vision, a collective vision of what can be accomplished throughout the river, where the opportunities are, what everyone's goals and objectives are, and even what are the roadblocks and concerns and things that are preventing that from happening, so that we can work collectively together to try to overcome them. We want to work towards a cleanup that supports habitat, establish partnerships to understand those needs, motivations, roadblocks, incentives, and commonalities. I think we all have commonalities that we'll be able to find, and conduct a visioning, planning, and implementation effort. And so this is the beginning of our visioning effort. All these yellow polygons with red dots associated with them, and I'm sorry if it's a little bit blurry, they come from a mapping effort where we've compiled many of the ideas that are already out there and some additional community ideas, and we need to build upon this. It comes from the trustee council's list of habitat opportunities throughout the harbor, and below the cleanup site, downriver and upriver from the cleanup site. And it's important to note that right now, 4 of these projects are complete. 3 of them are at the downstream end, and 1 is well above the cleanup site on the upstream end. The other ones are opportunities for habitat improvements where we need to work together to figure out how to overcome the issues that would, make this possible to happen, to create a clean slate during cleanup, so that we can continue to come in with habitat improvements afterwards. One thing to note is that the white dots going down the middle of the river are the mile markers. And so you can see that there's some very large gaps in here, where we don't have, we haven't identified a place for habitat improvement yet, but that doesn't mean they're not there. And so that's what we're looking towards all of you for, is ideas on how do we start filling the gaps in between here, so that we can establish connectivity. And now I'm going to turn it over to Sherry to talk about how do you do that in an urban setting.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Sherry Duncan. I'm a fish biologist and restoration ecologist. I recently became an employee with Yakama Nation, but I've been supporting Yakama Nation as a consultant since 2005. And I've been working on issues for them in the Columbia River Basin, and particularly here in Portland Harbor, studying the impacts from the Superfund area and cleanup, and moving forward into habitat for the area to support ESA listed species, Chinook, steelhead, and then species of concern, lamprey. And we look at Chinook as kind of a key species that if you, in the river areas, if you restore to Chinook and to their needs, you will restore and touch all those other species and support their life history needs and growth and rearing. So we showed, this is a nice photo that of the Portland Harbor area. And we want to talk about other urban settings and industrial areas within our region that are Superfund sites that we have been able to implement restoration and mitigation to create that string of pearls, to provide connected and diverse habitat for migrating salmon and other species. Some of the examples I'm going to show is Commencement Bay Superfund up in Tacoma, Washington. And then we have some from the Duwamish River and some in and around Seattle. So Commencement Bay was in the first listings of Superfund way back in like the 1980s. And it was one of the big five. It was one of the dirtiest spots. So the map you're looking at here developed and grew, and it continues to grow. And it came out of identifying mitigation related to the cleanup actions in the Superfund. It identified restoration from the natural resource damage assessment. And it also identifies a third bucket, which is once the cleanup has occurred, the Superfund is moving along, the Superfund related habitat projects are maturing, you'll have salmon recovery groups and habitat recovery groups come in through watershed planning efforts and ESA recovery efforts and try to identify additional pure restoration for salmon recovery. One of those areas is the top of the map is a circle. That's a large swath of land that, because of the cleanup, is now available for estuarine restoration and salt marsh restoration. And that is one of the biggest bangs for your buck if you're going to make habitat for Chinook. So they need nurseries. If you can just think of like nurseries, they need a place to go to rear and to feed, and then have some transitional time to move from freshwater to saltwater. And I chose Commencement Bay because you can start to see and reflect back on Portland Harbor, which is also a tidally influenced area, where you can start getting all these different types of habitat and mitigation throughout your system if you start planning ahead and really think through it right at the time you're designing your remedy or you're identifying where those areas are in need of cleanup. So one of the sites, so you think like urban area, you think restoration. A lot of times you hear the word restoration, you think everyone wants to take it back right to the way it used to be and pristine. That's not the case, and you're not going to be able to do that in an urban and industrialized setting. But there are pockets and areas where you can get land and have enough space to create those nursery areas and create some habitat that can be front facing of developed areas. This is an example of the Olympic View site in Commencement Bay. You can see on the left-hand side, it was just a flat slate. There had been cleanup that happened up in the upland areas, and sediments had been cleaned up. And we were able to secure the site and through natural resource damage assessment and develop this salt marsh area. And the salt marsh area is only a 1/4 acre. And when you go, I helped with the identifying sites, developing the restoration plans for the sites, to implementing the build out of the sites, to monitoring the sites after they were built to see how they were functioning. And when you would go to you would pick up a few juvenile salmon and a few resident fish prior to this being built. Afterwards, we had increased numbers of juvenile salmon that we picked up when we would go out and do our monitoring efforts. The eelgrass beds in front started to expand and grow further because of the cleanup and then the natural processes and functions that this area is supporting, and it's only a 1/4 acre. And so we've identified other areas that circled the bay and did similar efforts. If we could work across with industry and public lands and figure out where to put these little chunks of restoration. Another site, and this is one of the oldest sites, was the Middle Waterway site. And it's if you're looking down here, it's that center waterway, and you can see green and mudflat areas. That had been a very large, like Portland Harbor, there's a lot of fill out there and a lot of land was created for the industry. That had been a large mud bay, mud flat. And the bottom left was a city of Tacoma site that they restored. And these sites are probably 30 years old. And across the way towards the big white building was still rip-wrapped and no feature, no salt marsh, no mud flat. It had been dredged and whatnot and had gone through the cleanup. The company that owns the peninsula is called Simpson Paper Mill, and they were one of the largest paper mills in the region. They were approached and asked if they would allow for restoration or if they wanted to do their mitigation in this area right next to where they had their settlement and where they had to do cleanup. And as the conversation grew and grew, they decided that, okay, you can, from upland down through the riparian area into the mudflats, you can have that area, and that's where our restoration related to our natural resource damages can occur. So that site was built out, and then it continued after incremental years and discussions down the channel to grow and grow further. And that was all through work in coordination with the companies. Okay. Theophos is another just quick example. If you look to the left, all of the industry, and there had been smokestacks and warehouses along the area, and they were all cleaned up, removed. And then going forward into 2006, it shows more of an urban setting and mixed use area. And there's pockets of habitat that were put in and between all of the infrastructure, and a lot of climate resiliency was built into those areas. And again, so it's not big swaths of habitat, just little stepping stones throughout that the fish can migrate to. And these are just some other photos of areas in Commencement Bay. There's some of the head of the waterways. We were able to have land, and we identified it through working with the community and the agencies and the businesses to put in salt marsh and riparian habitat. Anytime a dock or some sort of public access structure or business structure would go in, they would ensure that it had light penetration, so graded gangplanks instead of cement. Again, the picture to the right is showing a very thin area of riparian and out into some large wood and boulders. And all of these areas, when you go out and monitor and collect fish, they are you find all species of juvenile salmon and probably there's 30 to 40 other resident fish species residing in these habitats in and around the bay. And they've increased after the habitat went in. There's other ways with infrastructure. Instead of a blank flat cement wall, you can have pockets and benches put in where the plants and fish can have nooks and crannies to go hide in and migrate along. The light penetration glass boxes in even a cement walkway can allow for light to come through to the water, so it doesn't have that dark area where predators hide. So you increase migration of juvenile salmon. There's opportunity. Instead, this is a blank, straight faced cement wall for the upland grass area at a park in Seattle. And that was taken out and worked with the community, and they were okay with losing the grass as much as the grass that was there to lay back those shorelines and create a living shoreline, a more softer approach. And then this slide is just showing in the Commencement Bay area after the cleanup, and because of the cleanup, the opportunities to go in and do restoration for salmon habitat and other habitat is allowable because of the cleanup that had happened. And so since 1980, after the cleanup, Tacoma is now doing these visualization exercises for climate resiliency, to gain more public space, to create more habitat, and they're finding large groups of partners and organizations that are helping them find funding. And after this visioning exercise, they are now moving into a feasibility study to figure out where to place and put additional restoration throughout the Commencement Bay waterfront. And so this just slide that shows and emphasizes the partnerships are really important, and the community voice is really important. The community can really drive a lot of the good work that happens in different watersheds and throughout cities and working waterfronts.
Wanted to end with how can you help? What can you do? Sometimes it feels overwhelming, right? I think we need to be very intentional, expedient, and collaborative in our efforts. It's a critical juncture, but there's a lot of opportunity here to change trajectories. And we need your help in doing that, to help have you participate in the habitat visioning, which some of you already have provided some ideas. We're so grateful for them, and we hope you continue to do so. Participate in waterfront and neighborhood planning, waterfront access issues. Provide your ideas and your local knowledge. Be a voice. Be a voice about your habitat concerns. If you're at a meeting and they're not talking about habitat, then maybe they have their blinders on and are, I think we need to bring it up and talk about the importance of it in conjunction with those other efforts. We've looked a little bit to what other Superfund sites are doing. And one of the things that we saw that really stood out to us is at Commencement Bay in Tacoma, at the Lower Duwamish in Seattle, those community groups actually advocated for cleanup to include habitat goals. Right now, Portland Harbor's ROD does not do that. And that is through a record of decision explanation of significant differences. So there's other ways to bring habitat to the forefront, but I think the most important thing is to be a voice. If you have any questions, our email addresses are at the bottom of this presentation. This is a slide that Sherry put together, and partly, you'll see an orca in the upper right corner, but when we talk about these salmon runs, they're the reason for the orca, right? There's a very heavy focus on orca right now and the other species that these tributaries to the Columbia River and then that flow out into the ocean, that they support a whole larger ecosystem. No, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Thank you for having us come and talk. And it's really important, all the work that you do as a community, and you can make a difference and you can push the needle and get work done in your riverfront.